It is my honor to introduce our midday keynote speaker, former US Senator Carl Levin. I first really got to know Carl Levin well when he was concluding his term in the Detroit City Council in 1977, after serving as its president. He was considering running for the United States Senate, but had not yet pulled the trigger, so to speak. I was a younger congressional staff member for a Detroit area member of Congress. I had been so impressed with Carl Levin's work on the city council that I decided to leave my job and work with him as his field director for his successful Senate campaign, and then to serve as his Michigan director for the first half of his first term. Carl, it was the best 4 years of my professional life. Carl Levin went to serve for 36 years and was Michigan's longest serving United States Senator. He rose to become chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee and served as chair of the important Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. He was known for his thoroughness, relentlessness, and preparedness. And there are at least some of us who believe that he was the true heir to former Michigan Senator Phil Hart's title as conscience of the Senate as well. Despite his national and, for that matter, international impact and prominence, he was known in Michigan simply as Carl, even to his staff, many of whom would have preferred to refer to him as Senator. His staff was intensely loyal to him, a couple of them staying with him for his entire 6 terms. Unlike many senators, he left DC when he retired from the Senate and resides, as he did as a senator, in Lafayette Park in Detroit. Carl Levin recently wrote a book, Getting to the Heart of the Matter, My 36 Years in the Senate. I've read it. It's terrific. And I hope everybody winds up reading it, because there are so many valuable lessons to learn, not just about history, but about life and politics as well. He details in it some of his more memorable experiences, both before and during the Senate. We are grateful that he has agreed to join us for this local history conference. Obviously, it's impossible to cover 36 plus years in 1 hour, and we shouldn't try. We'll just touch on a few highlights. If you want to get more, you have to read the book. As I said, it's worth reading. Larry Wagoner has also gathered some questions from some of our members and will intersperse them in the discussion and from time to time. Carl, welcome to the Local History Conference, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Rick, and thank you for your long friendship and your great public service yourself. You were talking about my public service, but you know, the people who aren't maybe as visible, they're not elected officials, are the ones that really deserve much of the credit for any accomplishments that public servants can do, but also it's a public service in and of itself. And you've been loyal to me personally, not just a great friend. Talk about loyalty. My wife, Barbara, we've been married now 59 years. We have 3 kids, 6 grandkids. So we've got a fabulous family. My brother, Sandy, my nephew, Andy Levin, who succeeded Sandy as a US congressman a couple of years ago now. So I'm blessed with friends, family, loyalties of constituents. I'm a blessed guy.
Wow, I'm blushing. Your book, Getting to the Heart of the Matter, My 36 Years in the Senate. Why'd you pick this time to write this book? I'm awfully glad that you did, and I think anybody who reads it, as I said, will be glad. But what prompted you to detail your extensive history?
Well, it was relating to what I thought I might be able to add through experience about public service, and my experience has been obviously a terrific personal experience for me, but I learned a lot about politics. I learned about public policy. I learned how you can get things done by working together with people of different views. Politics has got a bad name these days, but public service is really something which people should strive for, should participate in one way or another. And if they don't like what's going on, and I sure don't at the moment, the way to change things is to get involved. Everybody can't run for office, but everybody can participate by supporting people with whom they have a good feeling of honesty, truthfulness, directness, authenticity. It's sometimes a lot more important than where people stand on a particular issue. So I just felt that I had a contribution to make by sharing my own experience in politics and public life, and that I hopefully could maybe have a positive influence on people going into public life.
Your book covers a lot of ground from your early years to obviously post-retirement. It's clear you caught the bug both for political activity, but also for social justice at a very, very tender time. What caused you to catch the political bug? Was it an extension of your mission for social justice, or were there other things that, in addition, that caused you to catch the bug, so to speak?
Well, my dad's to blame, I'm afraid, for this. For the bug or whatever, it may be even worse. But at any rate, my dad was very supportive of FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, the New Deal. He was part of a family which was active politically. My brother had run for, well, first of all, my uncle, my dad's brother became a federal judge, and they had been involved politically too. But my dad also had, before I get to my mentor, Sandy, my dad had a terrific social awareness. He represented poor people, a lot of immigrants who came here with nothing. His law firm, he was a lawyer with his brother and more than one brother in that law firm, but they represented immigrants, and they did it in an unusual way. And this would have been in the 1920s and 30s. What they did was they knew immigrants didn't have money to pay lawyers, and so they offered their services free to immigrants, because they took a long-range view, and they knew that many of those immigrants would do well here because they worked so darn hard, and that they would go into business, many of them, and then that they would hire my dad and his law firm to do their legal work. So it was an investment in people, but it was also had a good result for themselves in terms of building a law practice. I guess that my father also was on the Corrections Commission, which is the citizens group that oversees the prisons. He had a soft spot in his heart for people behind bars. He communicated with them. When he passed away, the inmates at the Jackson prison, they wrote a beautiful editorial about him and what he had meant to so many prisoners. He also represented the farm workers for nothing. He had a soft spot in his heart for poor people who had very, very little opportunity. So my mother was kind of, she was a great woman too. I don't want to leave her out of this conversation, but so I've got to mention her. She was raised in Birmingham, Michigan. My father was raised in Chicago, born in Chicago, but my mother was a very strong woman and did some amazing things for young girls at that age, including driving her sick brother all the way to California by herself. And that would have been in the 1920s when women weren't even driving very much. But she not only drove, but she drove again her brother all the way by herself to California.
One of the things that I never asked you when I worked for you is what prompted you to run for city council in the first place? You fared very well in the first campaign, I believe, running third in a field with 9 to be elected, and then, of course, in the next term, becoming council president. Why'd you decide to run rather than practice law, for example?
Well, I guess what really, more than anything else, would have been the riot or the civil disturbance in Detroit in 1967. And a couple reporters suggested in the newspaper and on television, one was Judd Arnett in the Free Press, the other was Lou Gordon on TV, suggested that because of my background, that I could make a contribution to healing the city, to bring together people who maybe hadn't been brought together and hadn't been treated equally. And they suggested that I had been the first general counsel for the Michigan Civil Rights Commission after a few years in private practice. And then my civil rights experience as their counsel for about 3 years would serve me well on the city council and serve in terms of a civil rights background. And they also suggested that after I left the Civil Rights Commission's general counsel position, that I then got involved in legal aid and defender office in Detroit, which represented poor people, indigents who couldn't afford their counsel. And that background too, they suggested, might serve me well on the city council, and more importantly, serve the public well.
What were the takeaways after you left the council? And as you reflect back on your career in the Senate, what are the takeaways that you took from the council? What things did you pick up there that were useful to you in dealing with senators or with national problems?
I say the first thing is that if you want to get things done, you've got to work with people with whom you disagree. This is a democracy. It's a pluralistic democracy. And the city council had 9 members, very different backgrounds. And particularly as council president, when I had to pull them together to accomplish whatever our goal was for the city of Detroit, that we had to listen to people who differ with you. Put yourself in their shoes, understand their own experience, point of view, and you've got to find ways to compromise if you're an elected official. If you aren't willing to compromise, you're not willing to govern in a legislative position. It's essential. So that was one lesson I learned, working together with people and the importance of it. But I'd say another one is that in dealing with the bureaucracy, which we obviously dealt with as a legislative body, it's critically important that the bureaucracy have oversight, that they have elected government officials that oversee their operations to make sure that they're working efficiently and effectively. We had a major battle on the city council with the Department of Housing and Urban Development in Washington. It was a bureaucracy that was so rigid and so unable to operate properly in Detroit that we had thousands of abandoned houses. You got involved in abandoned houses later on in your career, Rick, and what the result was of HUD ineptitude in maintaining houses that were not boarded up, that were threats to neighborhoods, and they had something like 10,000 or more even at that time. And we took them on. You have to be willing to take on the bureaucracy. And I sure learned that as president of the city council. We took them on. We told them we were going to tear down their houses that they owned at that point. And they said, you can't touch federal property because if you do, we're going to indict you. And I said, go ahead, indict me, be my guest. You think a jury is going to invite a member of the city council for tearing down an eyesore and a danger to their neighborhood? They're going to convict you. You can go ahead and indict anyone you want, but no jury is going to convict me of doing what everybody in the city knew had to be done. You had to keep those houses safe and protected from violent use and drug addiction and so forth. Anyway, so I learned a bunch about congressional or legislative oversight at that time as the council president in Detroit.
Connected to what you just said a few moments ago, one of our trustees, Robert Hewlin, had a question and was wondering what your thoughts were about the lack of civility in politics and society in general today, and if you think there's a way out.
Yeah, there is a way out. It's the old-fashioned way. Be good to people. Don't stereotype people. Don't assume bad things is motivating people. We've got to go back, and it's harder, I guess, in a way with what we're going through now with being separated. But you've got to deal with people the way you want to be dealt with. And these are old-fashioned values, which most of us, thank God, learn in our families or in our places of worship. But we've got to put them more into practice, and that's what's missing. We've been missing leadership in Washington until recently, with a president who is divisive, who has made racial statements, sexist statements, who was highly divisive. I'm very, very happy to know the new president well. He's a guy who is nice. He's nice to people. He brings together people. It's his whole instinct. And I think it's going to be helpful to get us back, frankly, on a track which we left for a few years, and which I think was proven to be temporary. And our democracy more than survived it. I think we could come out stronger for going through a highly divisive period.
One of the things that I never ceases to bring a smile to my face are people that you consider friends, genuine friends, with whom you clearly had some major disagreements and stylistic disagreements. I'm thinking of people like the late Senator John McCain, like John Warner, like Senator Alan Simpson, and there are undoubtedly others. Would you care to talk a little bit about those friendships and how you cultivated them and they cultivated you, and how that worked to your advantage in seeking common ground in legislation?
Well, as I mentioned, it's essential if you're going to get things done for your city, state, or country. You're going to work with diverse people, because who we are as a democracy, we have such incredible diversity, and we ought to thrive on it. And always have, I think, as a country. We've gotten great strength from our diversity, and for the most part, with some obviously sad exceptions, we have turned diversity into a plus. So, there's very little legislation that I can name of that I was deeply involved in, for that matter, or even investigations that I was involved in, that I didn't work with colleagues very closely who have very different views. You mentioned a number of them. John McCain, for instance, and I had an investigation into Wall Street abuses, into tax avoidance schemes of wealthy people and corporations to avoid paying taxes. McCain was an extremely patriotic guy. I would have disagreed with him probably on 90% of the policy issues, but that didn't make any difference. We trusted each other. We worked together very closely, and we got some really important things accomplished. So it's true across the board. One of the most conservative members of the Senate when I was there was Dr. Tom Coburn of Oklahoma, an extremely conservative man, but a straight shooter. And he was very honest, very straightforward in what he said. He didn't talk out of both sides of his mouth. He meant what he said, and he was also, though, just a very nice guy to work with. And there's many examples. John Warner, we traveled together for many, many times. Senator Warner, probably, if not my best friend, one of my best friends in the Senate, a Republican, again from Virginia. So there's an example after example of why you have to, it's a better way to live, to have good friends of various views. It's a more interesting way to live a life, but it's also important that this be the case in a legislative arena.
Let's flash back to your first campaign as for the United States Senate. You had just finished 2 terms on the city council and concluded with the city president, the council presidency. How did you decide to run for the Senate? And did you expect to win?
Well, I decided to run. Excuse me. I decided to run for a number of reasons. Mainly, my wife caught me at a moment of weakness and said, you really ought to run for the Senate. You'll be a darn good senator. And so I said, oh, I'll go back to sleep, Barb. But Barbara surely encouraged me to run. And a lot of friends encouraged me to run, like Eugene Dreiker and Elaine, but a lot of other friends who encouraged me to run for the Senate. What happened is that the incumbent, because part of your question, I think, was that I think I could win. The incumbent had made some mistakes. He retired and then he changed his mind. But before he changed his mind, he said he was retiring, and these are his words, that he was tired of the job. And he said that publicly. I'm retired. He was retiring. And then he also missed a huge number of votes after he said he was leaving the Senate. Missed a lot of votes before he announced that he would changed his mind and he was going to run again. And that we used against him. It was fair. We weren't making up stories the way they do these days on social media and so forth. These were quotes of his, which we used very effectively. And I think the public knew that we were being honest about the quoting, and that, that it's relevant. If you're tired and miss a lot of votes, that's a relevant fact that the public should know about.
So you went on after that and you won an additional 5 terms. with the exception of the 1984, the first re-election, uh, those elections were got increasingly easier. How did it happen that that you wound up winning by such impressive margins with each election?
Well, I hopefully, and I believe that the people trusted me to vote for what I believed after listening to arguments and reading and studying for what I believed was right for the state, even though it may have been unpopular. And they gave me credit for that approach to public service. Do what you think is best. Don't be arrogant. Listen to what the public wants. If there's a majority of you, listen. Understand why. But if you think something is better for the state that may not be as popular at the moment, they understood and trusted me to vote for that. And I think that helped a lot. You know, nothing kind of gave me more pleasure than somebody walking up on the street and recognizing me or my glasses sometime. And said, "You Senator Levin?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "You know, I never voted for you, but I trusted you." Or they said, "I disagreed with you, but I voted for you anyway because I trusted you." Either one of those. The word trust, if that was in the conversation, that was music to my ears.
I can't recall the number of times, but I'm sure it's well into triple digits over the years that I heard people say an offshoot of, "I don't agree with much of him on anything, but I'm going to vote for him anyway." And the common denominator to those comments was because I trusted him, and that was something that you had and that you had achieved. Was there any time before you made the final decision in 2014 to not seek an additional term, a seventh term, that you considered not running?
No, until I decided that when I was 80 and I just was finishing my sixth term, was the first time I decided, you know, I had to make a decision that I wasn't sure of. Before that, I never considered retiring once I was in the Senate.
One of our trustees, Kendall Wingrove, had this question. When you went into the Senate, did you have any role models that you looked to, and how did they influence your leadership style?
I'd say in the Senate was not when I got there, but slightly before I got there. Phil Hart was the role model for me. He was a guy who was very different politically from maybe even a majority of his colleagues. I don't want to use stereotypes or labels because I don't believe in them. But anyway, he was probably more liberal or progressive, if I have to use a label, than most of his colleagues, even the Democrats probably, but surely with most Republicans. But he was so respected in the Senate. He was called the conscience of the Senate, not by just a lot of his constituents, and I believe most of his constituents in Michigan here, but also by his colleagues. And when a new building was built, which would have been really the third office building for the Senate, it was named after Phil Hart. And he was an amazing role model, I thought. I mean, of course, that was that's outside of the family. I had a lot of role models in the family, my brother, my dad, But outside of the family, I'd say he, as much as anybody, would have been the role model for me.
One of our fellow directors here at HSM was wondering this. It seemed like an unlikely choice on your part to serve on the Armed Services Committee and later to serve as its chair. You say in the book that you chose armed services in order to be informed about these life and death decisions. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I had never served in the military, and I felt that there was a missing hole in my experience in terms of being required to vote on such critical issues as, war or peace, and funding our military, and providing equipment for our military. And so I felt that I really wanted to learn more, to try to do the best I could to learn from not having served, that what I could learn about the military. And so that's, I think, why I picked the Armed Services Committee. And right off the bat, I picked it along with the Committee of Oversight, called then Governmental Affairs.
There is actually, as I recall it, one person, actually a member of your staff, your DC staff, who once made the observation to me that you were quite possibly the most liberal member of armed services, this before you were chair, that was still trusted by the military. Would you like to make any observations about that observation?
Well, again, I don't particularly like the label part of it, but I love the other part of the sentence about being trusted by the military, because we have an amazing military, truly amazing. And their families that support them. The leaders and the people who aspire to leadership and will move into leadership are so well read. Number one, these are not people who just have been gone through the fire of experience, which is the best teacher. They understand, if you've been in the military and been in combat, the price paid when you go to war. And my experience has been that the uniformed leadership are more cautious about going to war than the civilian leadership. And that was surely true with the Iraq War. They were much more cautious about it. And, some of the statements made, well, I won't go into that, but anyway, at the moment, she asked about it. But I really learned about how the leaders, the chiefs of the armed services, the chairman of the chiefs, our top generals and top military people, by the time they've had that experience and have taken the time, which most of them do, to be thoroughly versed in the lessons of history, as well as the lessons of combat and war, that they are really great leaders, not just military leaders, but they're great national leaders.
You mentioned in your book that the decision to go to war in Iraq was, your words, quote, the most misguided strategic decision by our government during your 36 years in the Senate. And of course, you were one of a distinct minority of senators who voted against it. Would you care to elaborate on any of that?
We hadn't been attacked by Iraq. We weren't threatened by Iraq. Iraq had a terrible dictator. That was a give. That was clearly true. But there was all kinds of dictators in the world that we have to try to find out how to deal with. And hopefully help their people get rid of. But that doesn't mean you go to war against every dictator. We would have gone to war against Russia, who had a dictator, Stalin, who was a terrible person to his people. At any rate, that can't be the test of going to war. It's got to be, is there a threat that's imminent, or have you been attacked? And that was part of my reasoning. The other part was that the president and people around him were misstating the intelligence. Well, first of all, of course, they said that they talked about him having nuclear weapons, but the intelligence was divided on that issue as to whether he had nuclear weapons. But that wasn't the issue for me anyway. The issue for me was, again, whether there had been a threat or an attack on us. But in addition to the question of the absence of nuclear weapons, what the president and his people, particularly Cheney and some of the folks in the Defense Department, were trying to make out is that, make the case that somehow or other there was a connection between the people who attacked us on 9/11 and Saddam Hussein, who was the dictator of Iraq, that Saddam had supported the attackers of 9/11. And that was flatly false. And the administration kept talking about their connection. And it was a false allegation. And our intelligence community told us it was false. So this was not a case where, the intelligence community is divided on it. There was no evidence that there was a connection between the people who had attacked us on 9/11 and the person leading the country that we were about to attack. And the president, in a number of speeches, made misstatements, misleading statements about that issue, which for me was the key issue as to whether you go to war. Because, if I thought or knew or believed or saw evidence that Saddam Hussein was part of the attack on us on 9/11, I would have voted to go to war in Iraq too.
Do you feel history has vindicated you?
Well, I think I don't want to, talk about personal. I never felt I needed vindication, frankly. I felt that was the right vote. That was enough for me. But at any rate, I think history has shown that we unleashed some forces there, which are now very dangerous to the world, including what's happened in Iran, in part in response to our earlier support of Iraq. When Iraq was at war with Iran, we supported Iraq at that time. By the way, when Saddam Hussein was there, then at that point we were supporting him against Iran, and they remembered. They obviously remembered that. So I'd have to say that that's also, I think, factually true. That's the case.
Let's shift gears a little bit to your role as member and ultimately as chair of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. You took on a lot of corporate giants, the financial world, and other banks, other major corporations. Of the issues that you took on, which are the ones that were most memorable to you?
Probably the hearings looking into the financial collapse in 2008. And, a great part of our population lost value in their homes, lost their jobs. It had a huge impact. And the people who were responsible, many of them, the biggest banks we have in the country, that participated in the collapse by selling bad mortgages, first of all, writing bad mortgages because they would be guaranteed by the government. So we had this huge savings and loan, the biggest one in the country in the state of Washington, that finally went bankrupt, that wrote, tens of billions of dollars of mortgages that they were paid off on by the government, but which were bad mortgages. The bank falsified information about people's salary and income, and then the people who were supposed to regulate the banks didn't do a good job at all of enforcing our laws. Then we even had the people who were the credit rating agencies like Moody's, the Standard and Poor's, and they were supposed to rate the bonds that contained these bad mortgages that would be bought by individual people or by, for instance, retirement funds for employees that buy bonds as an investment. Well, they ranked those higher than they should have rated them based on their economic value and prospects. And they did it for greedy reasons. They wanted to keep up with the opponent rating agency who was going to give them an A rating. So they gave them an A rating in order to compete, but it was the wrong rating. And people lost their savings as a result. But probably the biggest culprits at the end were the people like Goldman Sachs, who took those bonds, wrote up the bonds, got good ratings for them that they shouldn't have gotten, and then sold bonds that they knew by their own internal emails, knew were junk and crap, and even used the word shitty, by the way, and described them internally that way, and then sold them to customers. I mean, banks which sell crap to their own customers and they know it, and they should have paid a huge price. They paid minimal fines for what they did, but there wasn't the accountability that we need to have in and out of government, which is one of the important purposes of oversight.
Your focus on oversight, of course, and military preparedness was obviously there are things we could go on for many versions of this. But one of the things I want to focus on was that you were almost legendary with being able to keep a focus on Michigan and what was going on in Michigan, despite having to be very rooted in your committee work, in your floor work. How did you manage to continue to keep that balance between what was important in Michigan and what was important in Washington?
Well, it has to do with what's important to our public. And for people, the economy usually is number one. Do they have a job? Are they getting decent pay? Are the working conditions decent? Do they have decent health care? Do they have opportunity for advancement? Things that are important to people in their economic lives. And so that has to be dominant if you're representing Michigan or a congressional district, is what can you do to boost your economy? And so we spent a lot of time on manufacturing issues. For instance, a lot of time working to try to advance facilities like the Tech Center, the GM Tech Center, a lot of times with like a amazing charitable organization, non-profit organization called Focus Hope in Detroit, because they were creating jobs and training people. And so it's what's the answer to your question is why focus on manufacturing and on the economic issues is because they are first and foremost, I guess, other than health issues, in most people's lives.
A question I was wondering about is what you feel the toughest vote you had to cast in the Senate was and why.
Any vote going to war is the toughest vote. And I'd say that the Iraq war vote against that war was not a tough one. I believed it was the right conclusion, and I didn't have to, it wasn't 60-40 for me or 40-60. For me, it was a clear decision. The vote to go to war in Afghanistan was not a hard decision for me either, because they had attacked us. The people in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda, who was in Afghanistan, they attacked us. And so going back after them was the right thing to do. But the war vote, which was the most difficult vote, was the first Iraq war of the first George Bush, where Saddam Hussein had invaded a neighboring country who was a friend of ours. And if you tolerate that kind of an invasion of one country by another, that has ramifications where there's a physical taking over of a country through military invasion. And I voted against going to kick Iraq out of Kuwait. I think it was the wrong vote. And I think that President Bush was right, not only in deciding to go in, but in the way he fought the war and the troops fought the war. They did not do more than kick Iraq out of Kuwait. They didn't move into the capital of Iraq the way the second George Bush did. What he did was George Bush the first weakened the Iraqi army, as well as kicking them out of Kuwait, severely reduced their capability in the process of forcing them to go back to their own country. And I think that was the right way to not just, that was the right way to proceed, I thought, and did not have the severe aftermath like the second Iraq war did.
So let's ask the flip side of that. As you look back, and God knows how many thousands of votes that you had to cast in your 36 years as a Senate, are there any significant votes that you sit there and ever think, gee, I wish I'd have cast that one differently?
Well, I'm sure there's more than one. I just mentioned one with the first Iraq war, but
okay.
I say that one that has always troubled me, and I voted wrong on, thinking I was right at the time, but looking back, not too long afterwards, felt I had made a mistake, was when I voted against the confirmation of I think it was Edward or Edvard Koop, who to be the Surgeon General of the United States. I think he did a terrific job on tobacco, going after the health results of smoking. And it wasn't long after he took office that I sort of kicked myself and said, gee, I think I blew that one.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about something that's frankly near and dear to a lot of people's hearts who will be listening today. It was done I'm going to talk about it within the context of your comments in the book about earmarks. One of the things you championed in your efforts to make life better for Michiganians and Detroiters was the Detroit riverfront. And you succeeded in doing something that helped transform the Detroit riverfront into the thing that was just rated the best river walk in the country. Would you be willing to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, one of the things that we do in addition to working on the economy is to focus on the environment, all kinds of issues that relate to the environment. And we were able to get a earmark, so-called, for the Detroit Riverwalk, a very significant one, to help many years ago. As a member of the city council, we always talked about getting our river back to our people. We had all these old buildings and offices and rundown stuff on the river. And that was, 50 years ago, or more than that. But anyway, when on the city council, it was our dream to get the river back for our people. And when the occasion arose in the Senate, when the riverfront began to take shape, the river walk began to take shape, I saw an opportunity to really make a financial contribution to the taxpayers to that river walk. And I think it was a $20 or $30 million earmark for the river walk that we were able to get. There were some other things that I got involved in with the river walk also. And then when I was, after I was retired, they appointed me to the board of the Riverfront Conservancy, which I've been delighted to serve on for many years now as well. But a lot of other outdoor stuff beside Riverwalk, which I think the Michigan public and people who visit us really, really love. And there's so many things here in Michigan in the outdoors, like the Riverwalk here, of course, but we have areas that are protected from the wilderness protection given to a lot of the areas in Michigan. I led the fight in the Senate for wilderness protection, including, by the way, for the dunes. And that was one of Phil Hart's babies, but by the time I was there, the additional protection came through wilderness designation, as we call it. We have a lot of national parks in Michigan, which I was very deeply involved in the Senate, including the Keweenaw National Historical Park and the UP. We have the River Raisin National Battlefield Park down near Monroe, which is a major battle of the War of 1812. We've got the Marine Sanctuary Alpha Alpina, which is the Thunder Bay Marine Sanctuary, which is an amazing place. We've got a number of other national facilities. We worked with John Dingell on many of them because of his involvement. What a wonderful ally he was too in the House. But so there's a lot of things outdoors that the public. We have protection of the Great Lakes. These are the crown jewels, really, of the state, like a necklace around the state almost. But we got a lot of money for cleaning up the Great Lakes, a lot of earmarks for the Great Lake Restoration Initiative and other funding sources. So in addition to this fabulous river walk we have now in Detroit, it reflected an awareness and appreciation of the people's love for the outdoors here in Michigan.
We have only about 1 minute left, so I think Rick has one final question for you.
Well, I have one that's markedly different, a light one, and then a serious one. In addition to any final thoughts you may have, which we'll wrap up with this, I have one light question. How did you manage to get FDR's dog Fala into the Roosevelt Memorial?
Oh boy, we loved Fala as kids. We loved Roosevelt's dog. He was a legendary dog. Roosevelt carried him once took him to a meeting of the, of Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. I think he took him to about one of the big three meetings anyway. And the Republicans gave him a hard time because they had to put him on an airplane in order to join Roosevelt there. He always had Fala with him. And so they gave him a hard time. And Roosevelt's comeback was so great in his wonderful way of speaking. He said, no, I don't mind these Republicans attacking myself or my wife, my Eleanor, but I do. And more importantly, Fala resents the attack on him. And he was everyone's favorite pet in the country. He was buried in Hyde Park next to the Roosevelts. And my wife, Barbara, and I loved going out to the Roosevelt Memorial when we were in Washington some nights in the summer and watching people go up to the statue of Roosevelt with his dog there. And that was the sculpture you referred to, which I got added to the Roosevelt Memorial when I was on their commission. They go up and they pet Roosevelt's dog's nose, Fala's nose. And it's shiny. If people go there, they'll see how shiny his nose is. And they pose not so much with Roosevelt as with his dog. It connects to kids. It connects.
Well, thank you so much.
Kids connect, to pets. And the politicians sitting there, the president, you have these young kids that go up and they're connected right away with Roosevelt through his dog. And we used to get a pleasure out of watching this summer days and nights.
Thank you so much, Senator Levin, for spending this hour with us. We are indeed out of time. I also want to thank Rick Wiener as our moderator and questioner. It's really great to have both of you and just hear such wonderful recollections and the amazing career you had in the U.S. Senate. So thank you so much for joining us, Senator Levin.
Thank you both.
Thank you very, very much.
And thanks for the great work of history protection that you do too.
Thank you.